Ryan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. A bit warm in my office, but can't find a fan anywhere.
That's it. You're braving it. You haven't got air conditioning, so you're yeah.
No,
Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a towel, so I go completely red as these webinars go on. So you'll be able to sort of color grade me towards the end as I look a bright red lobster color. Um, so I hopefully you've got a little bit more of a breeze coming through your office. So, Ryan, I met you at the National Development Summit, and you guys were exhibiting there. You were connecting with so many developers, and it was clear that you were helping so many service providers and landlords and developers across the country. And I actually saw you talk at the Developers Network in Birmingham, and it was so exciting to see the level of detail that you went into. I thought I've got to get you on to one of these webinars, and we're very pleased to have you tonight. So, what I like to do with these webinars is basically give a bit of context to yourself. Maybe people haven't come across you before. Could you give us a bit of background to yourself, how you started out in property? I know you've got kind of a bit of an entrepreneurial background in the sense that you found a problem with your developments, and that's what's brought you here today.
yeah, sure. And thank you for the kind words. I don't think anyone has ever described compliance as exciting before, so that's a great start. Hopefully, that keeps everyone engaged for the duration. Um, but yeah, so my longer term background was I was in a corporate job. I hit COVID and I basically got a bit of an arsehole as a manager. And I just thought I need to create my own economy. Like I always had an itch to scratch. I always felt like I was what they term like intrapreneurial. Like I always felt like I was very creative within the business. I was always kind of wheeling and dealing offline, your eBay stuff and um, just selling things online and that type of stuff. So I always felt like I had that in me. And I always had an itch I wanted to scratch with property. So I basically, during that kind of COVID time, I started to educate myself on reading books, stumbling across, upon some of the educators you see out there, rightly or wrongly. I got quite an extensive free education out of it. So I guess it's what you make of it, right? Um, and basically, I decided to sell my house. I was in my forever home. I had six figures of equity in it that I'd built up over a period of being a homeowner for 7 years, I think, and kind of buying a property, doing it up, selling it, moving it on to the next one. And I ended up in a four-bed, semi-detached by myself. I was single at the time. Six-figure equity in there, and just thought I could use this better. So I basically sold my house, downgraded into a two-bedroom flat in not the greatest of areas. Um, but I knew that it was only a temporary measure. I used that money to then invest into property. I kind of did a host of strategies using that, and I also ended up leveraging some investor finance. But I did everything from I did commercial to resi, I did SA, I did buy to let, I did flips, HMOs, and eventually I did a social housing HMO. It was a Serco HMO that I did, and that was kind of what got my kind of that excited me more than the rest of the stuff. I felt like I was combining that HMO rental income that we get, that super rent that they term it as, with the hands-off nature. Like my personality type is I don't want to be bothered with my boiler's broke. I've got this leak, and that's just my personality type. I know some people thrive in that type of environment, but for me, I like to know exactly what's happening, and I don't do well under um, circumstances of unforeseens, let's call it. So from there, I basically started developing social and supported housing properties, primarily HMOs. Um, and basically, at the end of the project, you typically have to get a subset of reports handed over to the register provider, and that's typically fire risk assessment, asbestos, legionella, are typically the three main things. And what I saw was I was having to go to three separate contractors um, to get uh, all these reports. And I just thought, surely there's a better way. Like I'm not that bothered about it. I just want to give it to one person, get it done, and give it back to me. I was having to have three conversations around access. Have you locked up? Have you put the key code back? Have you turned the lights off? I'm sure we're all familiar with these types of conversations with trades. Um, and there wasn't anybody out there. And I thought, you know what, I can set this up. I was also seeing contractors go into some of these properties with some of the most vulnerable members of society. And these contractors, that your one man band style contractors, don't understand the sector. and they were walking into properties with super vulnerable tenants. Safeguarding was exposed on both sides. And I just thought that there has to be a better way of doing this, and I couldn't find one, so I created one.
Amazing. So you've kind of lived sort of the nerves and the anxiety of multiple entrepreneurs, because what you've done is you've basically started out, raised the capital yourself to start these projects, and you've transitioned through different strategies and then come to the stage where you're now setting up a formal business in the sense as a service provider to the property industry. Could you just give us a bit of an insight into what that's like? I mean, you must have been like so nervous to put that on the line to go out and pursue that, not just once but multiple times.
I've never felt like this. I know I've spoke to a few people that have maybe bet all chips or burned the boats or whatever, and they felt quite nervous about it. For some reason, I don't know if I'm weird, but I've just never felt like that. I always feel like I've had quite a high risk tolerance. It helped not having kids at the time. I guess my risk tolerance is slightly decreased now, but my risk tolerance is still there. Like for example, yesterday I've agreed to buy a property without seeing it. Some people may call that foolish. I've done it before. I'll do it again. I had a drive-by today. It's a mid-terrace. There's no cracks on the outside. It's not falling down. It's been there for 150 years. It'll probably be there for another 150, is the way I see it. So I don't know, maybe I've always just had this higher level of risk tolerance. But yeah, I've certainly never felt like doing what I've done is a risk. Um, I've always backed myself, Kim, rightly or wrongly. I fail every day. I'm not saying I get everything right, but I always back myself to make things right in the end. I say the same thing to clients in the business. I can't promise we will never make mistakes. I can promise we'll never make the same mistake twice. So I guess it's about, for me anyway, it's about backing yourself and then surrounding yourself with people that can support you, because I don't know everything. And to get to where I've kind of got to so far, I've had to surround myself with people that have known. Um, for example, in my business, we do something called a legionella risk assessment. 4 years ago, if you would have said to me, you're going to run a legionella risk assessment business, I would have said, what the hell is a legionella risk assessment? So I've had to learn that and surround myself with amazing people that do know and do understand, so I can, learn the guidelines around that.
So is it a case of that you have a sort of mentality of what's the worst that can happen, or is it a case of that you're going into every situation? And I imagine I'm going to wildly assume because you have a compliance business that you've done a lot already of the homework before you make that decision, because so it becomes a bit more of a system and a process, which eases that sort of anxiety that most people would feel going into those situations.
I do. I think I do enough. I have done enough reason with anything. I think jumping in completely blind is foolish. Um, but in the same breath, I think I speak on behalf of most of us. If we would have known how hard it was at the start, we probably wouldn't have started. So you
Yeah,
have to be a little bit naive going into it, right?
yeah.
If I got into property thinking, God, I'll be an absolute multimillionaire by now. It's going to be really simple. I've seen homes under the hammer. It'll be really simple. And that's just not the way it materializes. And it's the same in business, isn't it? Like I genuinely thought I knew how to run a business, and I've had to learn so much along the way. Yeah, you think just because you did business at school and college, you know how to run a business, but when you start getting to payday and you've got to manage your cash flow and you've got to start uh, what's to say, begging from Peter to pay Paul. Yeah, it puts a little bit of a different pressure on you. So I guess it is for me anyway. It's more about just having the confidence to back yourself that um, we can make it through. And also, I have a longer term picture. I think something that helps me is having a 5 year goal. I've got a 5 year goal. I've got my org chart on my wall here, what we will look like in 5 years' time. And whenever I sit here and think, or do I want to make that higher because it's extra money in the business?
Yeah.
That's just there as a little reminder. Well, if I want to get to that point, I just need to put my big boy pants on and deal with it and just go through that pain. Otherwise, I'm not going to get to that point in my business life and my personal life. Um, so I think that's something that I definitely do if I was anybody, like create that 5 year goal and that then and build your why around that. I know that the why stuff is quite corny, but I have my whys. Some of the whys are family, some of the whys are financial, some of the whys are um, geographical. So Yeah, I guess there's no right or wrong answer, I guess.
No, that's something that really resonates me is that almost the having that goal at the end of the 5 years, it gives you some context that the vision is bigger than the moment that you're currently in. So it
Hmm.
gives you sort of a forward momentum to keep going. Um, so with that, I'm going to take you sort of from the development, the property investment side to setting up the compliance company because there's two businesses that you're
Yeah.
now responsible for. So if it's all right with you, I want to just sort of explore the compliance company for a second, and then we'll move on to the social housing side of it because that's really interesting what you're doing with that.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is, in hindsight, listen, everything happens for a reason, right? But in hindsight, I did it the wrong way around. I should have done business first, property second. I believe that's the right way of doing it, moving those fast pounds into slow pounds and investing that. And that's what I'm doing now. Like with that property that we agreed to buy yesterday, it's a very simple buy to let. We're just going to put it on a social housing lease. We've already got the provider lined up, so it's very simple. But to your point, I did property for 2 or 3 years, and I found it really tough from a cash flow perspective. We all know that your spreadsheet only goes one way, and it
Mm.
only elongates. It never gets shorter, and you never save money. And keeping the lights on every month when your bank balance was just like this every single month, and then you get that. Hopefully, you get that nice day where your bank balance goes back up. And I was in a mastermind with people, other property developers, and I looked around and I was like, what have the most successful people in this room got that I haven't got? And when I kind of wrote it all down, it was a trading business behind them that allowed them to then do the property either on the side or supplementary to what they were doing. Um, so from there, I used ChatGPT, and I knew I wanted to start a business around my existing network, my existing ecosystem. I didn't want to go out there and find a new ecosystem of like a new network. And that network was basically architects, property developers, and social housing providers. So I put it all into a melting pot, and the compliance stuff came out. I think it suits my personality quite well. It's relatively black and white. Um, And yeah, so we then set up the compliance company. There's two divisions to the compliance company. One side is the bit that we've already mentioned, which I'm sure we'll go on to a little bit further. But the other side is it's called the compliance company, and it supports architects and property developers with their building control sign-off compliance. So if you're doing a new build, for example, building control are going to come round to you and say, "I need this subset of reports to be able to sign this off at the end." And just as an example, some people may or may not have heard of these terms, but you'll need a SAP, which is like an EPC before the project has started. You have to basically design what it's going to look like because at the moment it's a green field, for example, so you need to design that. Um, Overheating assessments, noise surveys, ventilation testing, air leakage testing, uh, acoustic testing, water calculations. Like we do a plethora of things that building control may ask you for. And the aim of setting that business up was twofold. One, to be a one-stop shop. I think it's very fragmented, the sector at the moment. And two, the contractors that I always engage didn't have a commercial outlook. They were contractors, they were assessors that didn't understand the implications of what they were doing on site, either financially or to the program. Now, what I mean by that is for example, I remember going to a SAP assessor, and I I was at a D on my EPC at the end. Um, so he gives me this form back, and Chris, I'm sure you know what my next question is going to be. If you give me a form that's got an EPCD on it, what do I need to do to get to a C?
Yeah.
So instead of asking that question and that back and forth, we as a business know that that's going to be the next question. So we do that for you. So we say, okay, based on the specification that you've already given us, we're here. This is what you need to do to get to here. And it just kind of cuts um, that whole conversation out because there's no need for it. Um, and then he actually came back to me and said, okay, I've put solar on because that gets you to a C. I said, why have you put solar on my building? He said, because that got you to a C the quickest. I was like, but you don't know if I can afford solar. So what else can we do? You don't know if I can put solar on. Am I in a conservation area? You've not asked me. Um, so that's basically why we then set that side of the business up, because I was just sick of dealing with contractors that didn't understand the commercials of property development. And obviously, having gone through that and had the battle scars myself, I I knew I was well placed to aid our clients moving forward. So the way we do it is have like a pre. We try and have a pre-conversation where you set a brief, and your brief might be, I only want to use gas. I need to achieve a C. I don't want to use solar because I either can't afford it or I'm outside or I'm in a conservation area. I don't want to use air source heat pumps because my granddad's brother at the pub told me that they were rubbish to use. Fine, we'll work with that. Like whatever your limitations are and whatever your preferences are, we will work with that. And then if you tell me, um, I don't know, I want to use all electric, I don't want to spend any money on solar, I don't want to do any money on air source heat pump, but I want to achieve an A, I can tell you pretty much straight off the bat, you're never going to achieve that. Like you need
Yeah.
to, and it's about having that open dialogue. And we found to be really useful, especially for developers, um, because I think it's refreshing for them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, post Grenfell, it was quite interesting because the more sort of developers that I've spoken to, the less, and it's now totally banned that building control can actually go and give you some advice or information on what you need to do to move forward. So the fact that you exist to be able to provide that support is so needed right now by a lot of developers because they're having that feedback and it's just being rejected and they don't know where they stand.
Yeah, it's a really good point because I hope there's no building control inspectors in the room. But for me, building control inspectors are glorified report gatherers. Like they don't offer any input. They're just there to gather all the data and say, yes, you've given us all those reports. And to your point, you raise a really good point actually, because there are certain things that happen within those reports that have a direct knock-on effect of one of the other reports. And what we found from experience is if you haven't got one person or one team controlling the entire supply chain of those reports, you can soon get yourself into a position where you've got finger pointing. You've got, oh, that wasn't me, that was Dave. It wasn't me, it was John. Oh, that was his fault. I thought he was dealing with that. And as an example, again, Chris, I don't really know what the audience level is with new builds and conversions. So if you feel like my terminology is out of kind of context, then please let me know. But when you do, let's say, a new build property, you have to have your SAP at the start. And within that SAP, you have to have something called an air pressure, air leakage test. And that's basically how airtight your property is. That's mandatory. You need to do that. Basically, the lower, the more airtight, the higher, the more leaky. Anything lower than a 3 is super, super airtight, all right? And it's really difficult to get there, and you have to plan it quite considerably in advance. Now, what we've seen is someone that's doing the SAP at the start that isn't doing the air pressure test put a really low air pressure test score in because they know it's going to get him to pass his SAP. And he's not worried about the end because he's not dealing with it. Whereas if that was one person dealing with that, you get to the end and you'll go, Chris, you done my SAP? Can you go and do my air pressure test? Yeah, I'll go and do it. Oh, you failed. Why have you failed? Oh, it was too unachievable. Well, you did it. You told me to do that. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? It puts that accountability on that one person. And we've seen that firsthand where you get those multiple contractors who are trying to finger point and blame each other. So for me, whether it's us or whether it's someone else, please try and get as few people um, dealing with your building control reporting as possible. And the analogy I always use is there's a reason most of us hire a main contractor on site because we haven't got the time, the energy, or the efficiency, let's call it, of having a spark, a plumber, a joiner, carpenter, whatever. Because you know what happens on site? Why is that not clean? That wasn't me. That was the electrician. Like, I don't care. It's one of you. Deal with it. And
Yeah.
it's the same with the reporting stuff. If you've got one person that's dealing with all of it, you immediately put that accountability on one person, or as I like to term it, you've got one throat to choke.
Love that. Right. I'm going to ask you to take your compliance company and developer hat off for a second. I've noticed we've got Nisha in the audience, who loves a bit of supported housing. So I'm going to ask you, once you set up the compliance company, you then found a requirement and a need, which I'll be honest, I've seen as well. The amount of people that are entering into this as a strategy is overwhelming. I've not seen anything like this since HMOs were a thing about 8 years ago. So, what gave you the idea for it? tell us a little bit about the business and how you're supporting clients at the moment.
Sure. Well, we're aptly named the Supported Housing Compliance Company because I'm an idiot and I want everyone to know exactly what we do. As Ron Seal says, does exactly what it says on the tin. We support supported housing providers with their compliance. So when I say compliance, it's property safety and compliance. So it's anything from fire risk assessment, legionella risk assessment, asbestos, gas and electric servicing. We've now started to do damp surveys on the back of AWAB's law introduction. Um, and we are, as far as I know, we are the UK's only dedicated supported housing compliance company. Um, and as I mentioned before, the reason it was set up is because I saw the fragmentation of the sector. Um, Multiple contractors having to deal with it's just so time consuming. Our best value as a business is just having that one point of contact. It's saying, Ryan, these are my 5 reports, go and deal with them. I don't think we're the most expensive. I don't think we're the cheapest. But the best value that you will get from us is by allowing us to just deal with everything, just going to one person and dealing with it. And yeah, I think the most important thing is that I'd say about the reason why our business exists and why I believe everyone should use my business, or I say a business like us, but I don't think there is anyone that exists, is you these some of these providers are sending contractors into these properties that aren't DBS checked. They have no safeguarding training. They are sending contractors in to accommodation with some of the most vulnerable members of society. And all of our staff are DBS checked, level 3 safeguarding. For example, if we went into I don't know, a substance abuse recovery centre or fleeing domestic violence, and I don't know, there's a guy in there. My guys can immediately raise that as a safeguarding concern to me, and then I can raise that to the client because the most important thing is making sure that the service user is protected. And I'll just give you a couple of anecdotes of why I think our business needs to exist. One example, one of our assessors went to an all-female accommodation. He was in the bathroom, and one of the residents came in, shut the door behind her, and sat on the toilet to speak to him. Could have been, it could have been completely innocent, could have been malicious. Not my place to judge. He immediately said, "I'm going to open that door for both of our safeties," and he left the building straight away and gave me a call. That could have been a serious issue on both sides.
Mm.
But because he was coached on how to deal with those situations, he was able to leave. We had another one of our assessors was surrounded by 3 Somalian asylum seekers in a property. He felt super intimidated. But again, because he was coached on how to deal with those situations, he was able to remain calm, say, "Oh, I need to get something from my car," left, phone me straight away, "Ryan, this has happened. Don't feel comfortable going back in." "Absolutely fine. Don't go back in. I'll raise it with the client. And next time we go, we'll make sure that there's someone there, a support worker or whatever." And it's just examples like that. I think like we're conscious of that. Like how many times has that happened in the sector and no one's raised it? Or worse, even worse, the other way around, if a contractor goes in and I don't know, touches someone or I don't know, you know what I mean? There's awful things that can happen out there. And I just think it's super important to protect some of these some of the most vulnerable members of society. And me and Nisha have tried to catch up. I think we're a bit like ships in the night. So hopefully after this we can have a proper catch up.
Yeah, I think that's so important is that it's not just compliance, it's actually understanding who your client is and having the systems and processes built around that individual client. Um, and actually hearing, the fact that the guy told to open the door and then immediately left to report it, is not just a nice story to hear from his perspective and your business, but also to know that in that situation, the vulnerable individual was also being protected because there was a
100%,
report being
100%.
made. Um,
Yeah.
so I imagine sort of with this sector, there's sort of a broad spectrum of people that you can sort of look after and that you can support, and sort of the properties that you're going into. What kind of sort of work is it that your contractors are mainly doing in these properties?
Yeah. So the services that we offer are fire risk assessment, asbestos surveys, legionella risk assessments, damp surveys, electrical services, so emergency light, fire alarm, EICRs, pat testing, and gas and boiler. Um, yeah, they're the services that we offer, and we can go in a whole host of, like you say, it's a spectrum, isn't it? This sector, and it can go from anywhere from low level all the way up to high level learning difficulties. And we cover all of the children's care services. Again, that safeguarding and DBS point is even more prevalent at that point, isn't it? So we cover that whole host of the spectrum, really.
Out of all the sort of compliance issues that you deal with, what would you say is probably the most sort of common occurrence that you come across that people maybe are not compliant but really should be?
Ooh, I'll probably answer this in two ways. Legionella risk assessment is probably the one that gets missed the most
Mm.
because it's not seen. I mean, 4 years ago, I'd know what a gas safe check was. I'd know what an EICR was, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't know what a Legionella risk assessment was. And I'm not even sure if most people on this call know that as a private buy-to-let landlord, you need a Legionella risk assessment every 2 years. In supported housing, it's 1 year because they're classed as being more vulnerable. Now, I would probably say that if you're a private landlord in this group, I don't know, about 70% of you haven't got a Legionella risk assessment on your properties
Yeah.
because you just don't know it's a thing. It just gets missed. It's not seen as critical as gas and electric for whatever reason, but you absolutely need to do it. Um, so that's the thing I'd say that gets missed. And then the ones that we probably get the most questions on are around fire because there are so many variables around it. It's perceived as the most high risk, especially after post Grenfell. Um, there's questions on how often you should service your emergency lights and your smoke detection system and all that stuff. And the answer is it varies on what the document deems as high risk. Um, Again, that's a grey area. People can consider high risk as high risk buildings, which is what over 17 meters, I think it is,
Mm.
or high risk. And the way I perceive it, and the way a lot of my clients perceive it, is high risk in terms of tenants. Like if you've got a high risk tenant that has maybe got, I don't know, mobility issues, having your emergency light service more frequently is probably quite a smart thing to do. So, yeah, something else that gets missed as well is something called person-centered fire risk assessments. So, if you've got a HMO, most people know that you should get the building fire risk assessed. But when a tenant moves in, you should be doing an individual fire risk assessment on that person. And it's things like, are they mobile enough to be able to leave the property in the event of an incident? Do they know how to leave the building in the event of an incident? I mean, you might get people from different cultures or coming from different parts of the world that don't understand what a fire alarm is. That might sound silly to some of us, but
Yeah.
they might not know that if that big siren goes off, you need to get the hell out of the building. And it's about when that check-in period happens, making sure that you are doing those person-centered fire risk assessments. That probably does get missed quite a lot as well.
Do you know, it's funny. I was at an event on Monday and there was a brilliant person called Laura, and she's got a management company, and they actually had a fire in their HMO about 2 weeks ago. And it was so interesting understanding sort of the thought process and the levels of stuff that they had to go into in detail, not just as the fire was taking place, but post when you're looking at sort of having the fire report done and the full investigation to determine what happened. Unfortunately, no one was hurt, and the tenant was out, but the other tenants of the HMO managed to jump in and unfortunately pour water on an electrical fire, but still managed to um, subdue the fire somewhat. And the tenants lost all their stuff. But it's like going
Uh-huh.
into detail about dates of birth, what age people are in the property,
Yeah,
where they're next of kin, all this sort of stuff that you don't necessarily consider
yeah,
um, as a HMO landlord. Because
yeah.
I
And
think,
I've spoken to a lot of fire risk assessors and a lot of landlords that have unfortunately experienced the fire. And what I can say is, from speaking to these people, if there is ever a fire on one of your properties, touch wood, that never happens. The fire service smell blood. They want someone to hang and they will go for whatever they can go for because they need someone that's a scapegoat for it. And I spoke to one of the guys at the fire risk assessor who's based down in Hampshire, and he'd just gone through like a 3 year lawsuit with the fire service. And he was like, I was an ex-fire service, so I thought I'd get a bit of grace. And he was like, they absolutely went for me. He was like, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And his biggest lesson was he needs to take pictures of the good and not just the bad. Because on a fire risk assessment, you typically take pictures of all the bad stuff, right? There's a box in the exit, there's a switch that's not working, whatever. But his lesson was I need to take pictures of all the good stuff as well. So then if something does happen, you can say, this is what it was like when I was there at the time. Um, I thought that was really important. And can I just answer one thing as well that you mentioned a moment ago about
Yeah.
that you was talking about other biggest issues. One of the biggest misconceptions I have about fire risk assessments is people call me asking for a certificate or asking for a like a pass or a fail.
Yeah.
A fire risk assessment is a assessment of risk at a particular moment in time. And I'll use the example I just used, right? I could go into a property now and the exit route is clear. There's nothing there. So that's great, right? You might come home after work and leave your bike right in the middle of the exit route. That's an immediately a fire risk, right? So a fire risk assessment is an assessment of risk at a particular moment in time that needs to be reviewed on a frequent basis, which is typically annually. But then you, as the duty holder and the responsible person, needs to make sure that you're monitoring your fire risk on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've mentioned this a couple of times on previous webinars, but in Coventry, where I live, the local council has been going bust for a number of years now. And one of the ways that they're looking to generate money is through fines on HMO landlords. So they're literally going in and picking up all the fire regulations, the notice board, etc., and charging landlords thousands of pounds of fines to make sure that they're doing what they should be. And one of the sort of key aspects of that, and it ties really nicely into what you've just said, Ryan, is that the tenants like to have a mess about with the notice board. And, that's where you as a landlord or a managing agent should be putting those notices about keeping the fire exits clear and the bikes, stored away correctly. And if you're not checking that that's done, and, if worst comes to worst and there's an issue, like you quite rightly said, it's not just the fire brigade that are on your ass, it's also the HMO officer that is looking for those unique little bits that will create a big picture of how an HMO is not being managed properly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would actually argue, listen, I think we all hate councils, right? But I'd potentially argue that what they're doing to landlords is cheap for the landlord because if there was nothing wrong, they wouldn't be getting fined, right? If something goes wrong, while there is something wrong with the building, you may go to prison. I mean, I'm sure I'd rather pay a fine than go to prison.
Yeah.
But I guess the answer is get someone in as soon as possible that understands the sector. Like I say, we do supported housing. 90% of our clients are supported housing, but we work across private rental and commercial as well. So we're completely qualified to do that. So we can obviously advise you on that. But my advice is get someone, make sure that fire risk assessment is done annually. Um, and yeah, get someone in that understands the sector, understands everything, and someone that you can have a conversation with. I think that was one thing why I set the business up, that there was a lot of contractors that maybe knew what they were talking about, but you just couldn't have a conversation with them. Or if you challenge them with something, it was, I've been doing this 30 years. And well, the regulations changed in April. So does it matter that you've been doing it for 30 years? Like,
Yeah.
have you read the regulation changes in April? Oh no, because I'm a one man band and I charge 150 quid for a fire risk assessment and I have no VAT. And I just do it for bare money, really. And that's probably the biggest challenge. Going back to the entrepreneurial question, the biggest challenge to my business at the moment is price sensitivity. Dealing with those people that, you know, I've been doing it for 30 years, but I've not read the regulation changes from April and charging you £150 fire risk assessment. Like, we can't compete with that. Um, so yeah, I think we're great value for what we get, if I do say so. But
I'd push back on that slightly. In terms of the market, from my experience, it is professionalizing itself a lot more. So those people that have been in the industry, maybe you've got a landlord that's been in it for 30 years, that might have been going, the going rate for a fire risk assessment. But I think those people got into property for passive income and to build portfolios on the side of, as a retirement plan. Whereas the people that are coming into the industry are doing it for professional reasons to build a career out
Hmm.
of it, not as well just, the financial opportunities. And it's businesses like yours where they really, really need the support, and they are willing to pay the the right amount to have the level of cover that they need, because essentially it's not just a side hustle for them, it's their full livelihood.
Yeah, no, I do understand what you're saying. I guess what I would say is Rachel from accounts at the government is obviously squeezing us at every angle. And it's only natural that if you get three quotes, you want to go for the cheapest, especially if you don't understand the implications of having a fire risk assessment that is weak would do to you in court, for example. You'd go, I'll go for the cheapest. The worrying thing is I speak to some housing providers that ask us to quote for work and we don't win the work because we weren't the cheapest. And that's fine if you're comparing apples and apples. But if you're comparing apples and oranges and one's cheaper than the other, that's concerning, especially if you are a housing provider looking after some of the most vulnerable members of society. And I guess, to be honest with you, Chris, that's why I try and do things like this, because my job is to try and educate people as much as possible. And whether you come and use me or not for me is an irrelevance. If you make sure you do the right thing with the right people and protect your residents, especially in supported housing, then I think I've done my job. So that's like why I like doing things like this.
Well, I want to really pick you up on that, on the supported housing because we started this section of the webinar talking about supported housing, and some of the information that you've given has not been just valuable for supported housing, but for property more widely. Um, but the real thing with supported housing is the residents that you're dealing with and the levels of support that they need, which is why they are in supported housing. And you mentioned about contractors going into properties where they've been in necessarily situations where they've had to report that and have to go around certain safeguarding measures. What I wanted to ask you was that is there anything that we can learn from tonight from you in regards to um, things to be aware of with those vulnerable people in the property? So you've talked about situations that you can report um, post the event, but actually, is there something you need to be mindful of when you are entering into the property that makes you not just vigilant to those individuals, but also respectful of the homes that you're entering into?
Do you mean entering into the lease or physically entering the property once you've leased it?
Physically entering into the property.
Okay, okay. So I guess the first thing I'd like to understand is the type of tenant that's in there. Like, what's my demographic? Is it um, is it learning difficulties? Because yeah, I've been in some of these learning difficulty care homes and stuff, and if you're not aware you're walking into that type of scenario, it can be quite intimidating, especially if you're not used to that type of stuff. Um, and yeah, just I think that's the main thing, to be honest. Like understanding your demographic. Like if I was walking into, I remember going to an all-female accommodation once, and they refused to let me in. And if I didn't know what the demographic was, I could have kicked up a bit of a shitstorm. And I'm like, no, I need to come in because I'm not getting paid. Like you can imagine a normal contractor may do that, right? And go, no, I
Yeah.
need to come in because I don't get paid. I've turned up here now, etc. But because I knew that these people were fleeing domestic violence, they refused to let me in. And you know what? I get it. Like straight away, I was like, yep, you know what? Next time I'll make sure I come with one of your support workers. Um, Phoned it through, and on the back of that, we offer female assessors. So if you say to us it's an all female accommodation and you have to be a female if you're not accompanied, then we can offer that service for a surcharge. But because we have to get them, there's obviously not many female assessors out there, so we have to get those in specialists. So we have to charge a surcharge for that. But I guess it's about understanding your demographic of your tenant um, and working with that. And one of our core values in the business is empathy. I guess that's the main word around that, right? Just having empathy with these people that are vulnerable in these properties and not kicking up a shitstorm because you can't get in or whatever. Just you know what, I get it. Like, what can we do next time to make sure that you're happy and I'm happy?
Yeah, I love that. Just being aware of what people's requirements and needs are before you enter the property will alleviate a lot of awkwardness and difficult situations. So Ryan, in terms of people, if they want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I'm most active on LinkedIn at Ryan Taylor. We have our website is thecompliancecompany.uk, and you will see a dedicated supportive housing um, area on there if you're interested in that side of the business. We're also on Instagram, the Compliance Company. I think it's at the Compliance underscore company, I think. Probably should have checked that before I came on. Um, so yeah, there's a plethora of ways. If you want to email me direct, if you've got any specific projects that you just want me to take a look at or you want some advice on, then it's Ryan at thecompliancecompany.uk.
And I think I know the answer, but how soon should people get in contact with you in terms of if they're thinking of taking on a project or they've already got a project in place?
Yeah, I'm free to use, right? So I'd advise getting to speaking to me as soon as possible. And if I think you're too early, then I'll tell you too early. But I'm free to use and abuse. Email me and we can have a chat and I can help you. And like I say, if you don't end up using our services, but you end up doing the right thing moving forward, then I've done my job. So
Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for tonight. I really, really appreciate you coming on. It's been an absolute tour de force, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it at home. And if you want to watch this episode back, you can do in the on-demand webinars tab of UK Homes Network. And yeah, if you are watching the recording, then please do reach out to Ryan. He would love to hear from you. So yeah, Ryan, thanks very much. Really, really appreciate it.
no problem, just in time for the game.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everyone, and take care. We'll see you next week.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Chris. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.